Today, we're ranking every major tank of World War II, from the steel coffins that doomed their crews to the machine that dominated the battlefield. 10. Fiat L3/35, the coffin on tracks. Picture Italy, 1935. Mussolini is riding high on imperial ambition. His engineers hand him a tank. Well, they call it a tank, and it rolls out looking like something a child built with a tin can and an engine stolen from a motorcycle. This is the Fiat L3/35, and it is, without question, one of the most embarrassing machines ever sent into combat. Let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie. The L3/35 weighed just 3.2 tons, roughly the weight of a large pickup truck today. Its armor, a paper-thin 13 millimeters at its thickest. For context, a standard rifle bullet at close range could punch through it. A rifle, not a rocket, not a cannon, a rifle. Its crew was 2 men, crammed into a hole barely big enough to breathe in. It had no turret. Instead, it had a pair of 8mm machine guns fixed to the front, meaning the entire tank had to rotate to aim at anything. Want to shoot something on your left? Turn the whole vehicle. During a battle, under fire, good luck. Italy deployed these things in Ethiopia, in Spain, and catastrophically in the western desert of North Africa. British crews in Matilda tanks didn't even bother calling them threats. Soldiers nicknamed them sardine tins. In the 1940 campaign in France, some were destroyed by enemy infantry with anti-tank rifles, weapons designed for far heavier targets. The L3/35 wasn't a tank. It was a liability with a flag painted on it.
9. Type 95 Ha-Go. Fast, light, and completely outclassed. Now we move to the Pacific, and to a machine that was, in its time, not entirely terrible. The problem is, time moved on, and the Ha-Go didn't. Japan's Type 95 Ha-Go entered service in 1935 and was designed to support infantry across the vast, road-scarce terrain of China and Southeast Asia. At 7.4 tons, it was fast, hitting nearly 45 kilometers per hour. And for 1935, that wasn't nothing. It had a 37mm main gun and enough armor, 12mm maximum, to stop small arms fire. Against Chinese forces in the late 1930s, it worked. The Japanese army swept through Manchuria and China partly on the back of armor like this. But then came 1941, the Pacific War. And suddenly, the Ha-Go was fighting a completely different enemy with completely different weapons. American M4 Shermans, the 37mm gun bounced off their hulls. Landing on Pacific Islands meant jungle terrain where speed meant nothing. At Guadalcanal, at Tarawa, at Saipan, Ha-Go tanks were destroyed by American bazookas, artillery, and even concentrated rifle fire at vulnerable points. The tragedy of the Ha-Go isn't that it was poorly built. It's that Japan never replaced it with anything better in time. They kept sending 1935 technology into 1944 battles. Thousands of Japanese tankers died as a result.
8. M3 Lee, the right answer at the wrong time. Here's where the story gets complicated, because the M3 Lee doesn't belong at number 8 because it was stupid. It belongs here because it was desperate. By 1940, the US Army desperately needed a medium tank. The Germans were steamrolling Europe with their Panzer IIIs and IVs. America had nothing ready. Their M2 medium tank was outdated, and the M4 Sherman wasn't ready yet. So American engineers made a brutally pragmatic decision. They took a 75mm gun, the gun they needed, and instead of mounting it in a proper turret, which they couldn't manufacture fast enough, they bolted it to the side of the hull. Then they stuck a small 37mm turret on top for good measure. The result looked like a rolling apartment building, and British crews in North Africa, who received it via Lend-Lease, immediately nicknamed it the Grant, and then quietly complained that it was a nightmare. The problems were many. The hull-mounted 75mm gun had a very limited field of traverse, about 15 degrees. To aim, you essentially had to point the whole tank. The silhouette was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, making it one of the easiest targets in the desert. German anti-tank crews called it the shop window because it was so visible. And yet, and this matters, at the Second Battle of El Alamein and in the early North African campaign, the M3 Lee was the only Allied tank that could even threaten German armor at range. It bought time. Real, costly, necessary time. The Lee wasn't a great tank, but it was the right tank for a desperate moment in history.
7. Panzer III, the backbone that broke. If you want to understand Germany's rise and fall in World War II, watch the Panzer III. Its story is the story of the Wehrmacht's armor.
Designed in the mid-1930s and deployed in mass from 1939 onward, the Panzer III was everything a pre-war tank should be. Well-built, reliable, with a three-man turret crew that gave it a genuine tactical advantage. Most tanks of the era had the commander also serving as the gunner, meaning he was always distracted. The Panzer III separated those roles. In Poland, in France, in the early days of Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, the Panzer III was terrifying. It mounted a 50mm gun that could handle most Allied and Soviet armor through 1941. Its crews were trained with an almost religious intensity. German tank tactics, radio-equipped vehicles operating in coordinated formations, were years ahead of anyone else. But here's where the story turns dark. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, they met the T-34, and the Panzer III's 50mm gun could barely scratch it. The armor? Insufficient. Germany tried to upgrade it, longer gun, more armor plating, but the tank's hull simply couldn't carry much more weight without breaking down. By 1943, the Panzer III was being pulled from frontline combat and reassigned to training and secondary roles. A tank that had helped conquer a continent, rendered obsolete in 2 years. That's the brutality of technological war.
6. Churchill tank. Ugly, slow, and nearly indestructible. Nobody who saw a Churchill tank for the first time was impressed. It was wide. It was slow, top speed of about 25 kilometers per hour on a good day. It looked like a giant mechanical caterpillar from the First World War. Early models were so mechanically unreliable that British tankers told dark jokes about them. And yet, the Churchill earned a reputation among those who fought alongside it that bordered on reverence. The reason? Armor. The Churchill Mk7 carried up to 152 millimeters of frontal armor, thicker than the Tiger I at its heaviest points. German anti-tank guns that shredded other Allied tanks frequently ricocheted off the Churchill's hull. At the Battle of Medellin in Tunisia in 1943, and more famously in the Italian campaign in Normandy, Churchills absorbed punishment that would have destroyed anything else on the field. But the Churchill's true genius was terrain. While Shermans and Panthers were road-dependent, the Churchill's wide tracks and low ground pressure let it climb slopes and cross ground that other tanks simply couldn't manage. At the Battle of Longstop Hill in Tunisia, Churchills climbed terrain so steep that German defenders had literally left it undefended. They assumed no tank could get up there. It was no weapon of blitzkrieg, but as a machine for grinding through the hardest fighting of the war, Italy, Normandy, the Reichswald, the Churchill was, quietly, magnificent. 5. Panzer IV, the workhorse that refused to die. Here is a tank with a story of pure, stubborn survival. The Panzer IV was designed in 1936 as a support tank, meant to carry a short 75mm howitzer to blast infantry and fortifications while the Panzer III handled enemy tanks. It was never meant to be Germany's main battle tank. And then history had other plans. When the Panzer III proved inadequate against Soviet armor, Germany faced a crisis. But the Panzer IV had one critical advantage. Its hull was slightly larger and could be upgraded. Engineers fitted a long, high-velocity 75mm gun, the WW2, and suddenly Germany had something that could fight the T-34 on equal terms. They kept upgrading it, Ausführung F, then G, then H, then J. By the final versions, the Panzer IV weighed nearly twice what it did originally. It carried extra armor bolted to the sides, called Schürzen or skirts, to protect against Soviet anti-tank rifles. It never stopped being in frontline service until the last day of the war. Over 8,500 Panzer IVs were built. It fought in Poland, France, North Africa, the Eastern Front, Normandy, the Ardennes, and Berlin. No other tank served in every major German theater of the entire war. It wasn't the best tank Germany had, but it may have been the most important. 4. M4 Sherman. Quantity, quality, and the most controversial tank of the war. No tank in World War II generates more argument than the Sherman, and that argument is, at its core, a moral one. The M4 Sherman was America's primary tank, and it was produced in almost incomprehensible numbers, over 49,000 built between 1942 and 1945. It was reliable, it was easy to maintain, it could be loaded onto ships, transported across oceans, unloaded, fueled up, and driven into battle within hours. For a global war fought across 3 continents, that wasn't a feature, it was a strategic asset. But here's the brutal truth that every Sherman crew member knew. In a straight fight with a Tiger I or a Panther, the Sherman lost. Its 75mm gun in standard configuration couldn't reliably penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges, and the Sherman's own armor, 76mm maximum, could be penetrated by German 88mm guns from well over a kilometer.
Early Shermans caught fire so readily from penetrating hits that German crews called them Tommy Cookers, and Allied soldiers called them Ronsons. Late-war Shermans with the high-velocity 76mm gun and wet stowage to prevent ammo fires were genuinely competitive machines, and in the hands of experienced crews with artillery and air support, Sherman battalions ground the Wehrmacht into dust. It wasn't the best tank, it was the right system.
3. Tiger I, the monster that haunted a generation. The Tiger I didn't just dominate battlefields, it dominated minds. Even before Allied soldiers had faced one in combat, they'd heard stories. By 1943, tiger phobia, a genuine documented psychological phenomenon, was affecting Allied tank crews who would report tigers in every engagement, even when none were present. The tank had become a myth before most men had seen one. The Tiger I earned that fear. Its 88mm KWK-36 gun, derived from the legendary Flak 88 anti-aircraft cannon, could destroy any Allied or Soviet tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor was 100mm thick, angled or flat, and required special approaches to defeat. At Villers-Bocage in June 1944, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, commanding a single Tiger I, destroyed approximately 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns in a single engagement before withdrawing safely. But the Tiger had a fatal flaw, and it was built into its very bones. It was too heavy, too expensive, and too difficult to maintain. At 57 tons, it broke bridges. Its overlapping wheel system, innovative in theory, packed with mud in Russian winters and froze solid. A single Tiger cost roughly the same resources as 4 Panzer IVs. Germany built only 1,347 of them. Ferocious, legendary, self-defeating.
2. T-34, the tank that saved the world. If one machine changed the outcome of the Second World War, it was the T-34. When German tank crews first encountered it in July 1941, just weeks into Operation Barbarossa, they were shaken in a way that nothing had shaken them before. Their standard anti-tank guns bounced off its sloped armor. Their Panzer IIIs and IVs couldn't reliably penetrate it at combat range. German General Erich von Kleist called it the finest tank in the world when he encountered it. General von Rundstedt reported that the T-34 represented a complete surprise. What made it so revolutionary? 3 things: slope, gun, and simplicity. The T-34's 45mm hull armor was sloped at 60 degrees. Due to the physics of armor penetration, this made it functionally equivalent to nearly 90mm of vertical plate. The 76.2mm gun could handle any German tank of the period, and its construction, welded rather than bolted, designed for rapid mass production, meant that Soviet factories could churn them out faster than Germany could destroy them. Early T-34s had real weaknesses: poor visibility, a 2-man turret that forced the commander to also serve as killner, and radios that were initially rare. Soviet crews died in enormous numbers in 1941 and 1942, but the tank kept improving. The T-34-85, introduced in 1944, added a larger turret with an 85mm gun, a dedicated commander, and radios in every vehicle. By 1944, the Red Army was fielding them in corps of hundreds at a time. Germany had no answer. Over 84,000 T-34s were built in total. No other tank in history was produced in greater numbers. And in the vast, brutal, industrial killing ground of the Eastern Front, numbers were everything.
1. Panther, the perfect tank that almost won the war. The Panther didn't start as Germany's best idea. It started as Germany's panicked reaction to the T-34. After the shock of 1941, after realizing their existing tanks were outclassed, German engineers were sent to study captured T-34s on the Eastern Front. Their mission? Copy what works, improve what doesn't. The result, entering service in 1943, was the Panzerkampfwagen V Panther. Everything about the Panther was designed to win. Its sloped frontal hull armor, 80mm at 55 degrees, was, for practical purposes, nearly impenetrable by any Allies fielded. The long 75mm Kfak-42 gun had a muzzle velocity so high that it could penetrate the T-34's front plate at 1,500 meters, farther than most gunners could accurately identify targets. It combined the T-34's sloping armor concept with German precision engineering and a proper 3-man turret crew. The Panther's first major engagement, Kursk, July 1943, was a disaster due to mechanical teething problems. The initial versions broke down constantly. Transmissions overheated, final drives failed, the tanks arrived at the front with unresolved manufacturing defects. Nearly half the Panthers at Kursk were knocked out by mechanical failure, not enemy fire. But Germany fixed those problems.
By late 1943 and through 1944, the mature Panther Ausf A and G variants were the most balanced fighting vehicles of the entire war. Allied tank commanders in Normandy considered the Panther, not the Tiger, their most dangerous opponent, precisely because it combined hitting power, protection, and mobility that the Tiger lacked. American General Omar Bradley's headquarters issued a bulletin warning that the Panther outclassed any Allied tank in head-to-head combat. The only reliable way to kill one from the front was with a 17-pounder British gun, a lucky shot to the gun mantlet, or flanking fire. The Germans lost the war, but they built the template for every tank that came after it.
If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like this one too. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Our channel is small, so we are replying every comment below. Comment any suggestion for future videos. Thanks for watching.